Thank you for attending today. Just a couple of very brief words of introduction. So this event was organized by Giulia Zampini, Karen Worth, and myself, building on a previous event that the criminology team had run at University of Greenwich in 2018. The event was entitled Deconstructing and Reclaiming Impact, and was exploring the gaps between our own personal interpretations of impact and the formal criteria that increasingly we need to meet as academia is embedding KEF into the metrics that are used to assess our performance. With this event, we would like to start an ongoing work on impact as part of the newly established Center for Applied Sociology Research, with the idea of creating working groups to jointly develop a better understanding, and why not also a critique of the concept and practices of impact in the neoliberal university. So today we have a keynote by our very own Professor Claire Donovan entitled Impact for Beginners. This will be followed by a Q&A. After the Q&A, around 3 p.m., we will split the audience into groups for a reflection on personal experiences of impact. And we will then rejoin the plenary for comparing notes and closing promptly at 3:30. So during the talk, you are free to use the chat to type any questions that you might have, but then all the questions will be answered at the end. So please, of course, keep yourself muted, as you know, and Giulia will now be introducing the keynote and chair the session. So happy listening.
Thanks, Elena. And Professor Donovan, Claire Donovan, thank you so much for joining us today. I was super excited about the opportunity to listen to your talk, in part because I recently found out by looking at your bio that you were contributing through your research to the creation of sort of the impact component of the 2014 REF. And so, it's so interesting, I think, from my perspective, to hear from researchers who are not just, who are kind of creating and informing the metrics and narrative of impact, rather than just kind of experiencing it, at the other end. So I'm so chuffed that you could join us, and I'm just so curious to hear all about your experiences as well as your advice for us in your Impact for Beginners talk. So without further ado, please take it away, Claire.
Okay, thank you very much. And thank you to the Centre for Applied Sociology for the invitation to speak to you all today. Yes, I do research on impact that has had an impact on impact. So that's very meta, but I'll share my screen and I'll get cracking with the talk. There we go. Can everybody see that okay?
Yes.
Brilliant. Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to be talking, the talk title is Impact for Beginners, because I was asked to present something that people could engage with who are a bit more familiar with impact, as a bit of a refresher, but also for somebody who's new to this idea of impact, it will hopefully be a helpful session. So okay, so what I'm going to do, it's a sort of fairly basic introduction to impact, and with every single bullet point that comes up, basically we could have a webinar sort of devoted to every single issue. So, but I'm happy to pick up any issues in the questions and discussion afterwards. And the focus of this, because we are in the UK research environment, will be UK research and funding and impact within that context. So I'm going to discuss what is impact, good place to start, talk about pathways to impact, which is to do with the UK Research Councils, talk about impact in the REF, and that the REF assessment period has just passed, and I was lucky enough to to be able to support and work with the ref impact submission for this area. So I got a nice overview of the kind of impact work that is going on here. And just to round off with just some top impact tips, which hopefully might be of some use for discussion later on. So I thought I'd start with a short impact bio, because this is an area that I started working in about 2005, before it was fashionable or a hot topic. And the reason for my involvement in this area was quite political. I've been doing a lot of research on assessing research quality and humanities, arts and social sciences. And this impact thing came up and nobody wanted to touch it. At the time, I was a research fellow at the Australian National University, and Australia were coming up with their idea of something like the, at the time, research assessment exercise, which here has been replaced by the REF, and they wanted an impact component and were suggesting using just simple metrics for all of it, which would have been a disaster for humanities, arts and social sciences, because it was all tied to spin-off and commercialization and patents, for example. So through that work, I eventually ended up being invited to chair an Australian technical working group on research impact. And this was the chief scientist was thinking, okay, how will this impact component for their kind of national research exercise work? And he wanted metrics only, but my group managed to persuade them to go a narrative route. And actually that sort of formed the basis of how impact in the REF was taken up after that work. So in the UK, impact was new in the REF in 2014. So I sort of helped to assess the pilot impact case studies for HEFCE at that time. I've also been a co-investigator on a very large EU FP7 grant for 2.3 million euros. And that was across, I think, 5 different countries, looking at evaluating the impact and outcomes of social sciences and humanities research. So hopefully I'm useful for you lot today, because even though I'm interested in impact generally, I've always got my eye on what does this mean for the social sciences? What does this mean for the humanities? So there was the Willesden review of the role of metrics in research assessment. So I was invited to give evidence to that review, speaking up about the sort of the impact of impact on the social sciences. And I've given lots of advice on impact to different governments or national research funding organisations who've sort of jumped on the impact bandwagon. So it's a big thing internationally. And sort of as a result of this, I've done, I've published a fair deal on the idea of assessing research impact, but particularly in the humanities, arts and social sciences. So that I've co-edited 3 journal special editions devoted to this subject. And I've had to think over 20 refereed journal papers and chapters all on this particular area as well. Okay, but enough about that background. So what is impact? Now, this can be answered in very simple terms in the UK context. So we're talking about what are the wider benefits of research for society. Now, I might get picked up saying that this is a bit simplistic, because it could be that research impacts and it has negative consequences for society. A colleague of mine came up with the term grinpacts, and we can also imagine that what might be a benefit for one group might at the same time be something negative for another. So an example that's often given in the Australian context is perhaps coastal conservation that stops fishing in a particular area, which may have environmental benefits, but for any people whose livelihood was gained from fishing in that area, obviously that's a negative benefit. So that's a simple example of how something can be viewed as positive or negative at the same time. Now, in terms of benefits, these are often broken down into economic, social, environmental, and cultural. And I've put them in that order because that's the order that tends to get reflected in policy documents. So when I was chairing the government committee in Australia, we used to have a bit of fun and put cultural, social, environmental, economic in our drafting, and it would always come back economic, social, environmental, cultural. So so that's a bit of sort of policy rhetoric there, and that can be broken down even further. So quite commonly, we can think even more in terms of impacts on policy or impacts on health or impacts on well-being. So we'll also see some other definitions that are provided, but as you can see, these are pretty broad. You can sort of fit quite a lot of things into how things are being defined. What's important though is how things are being measured and what can be captured when looking at it from that end. So when we're talking about impact, you also often hear the term scientific impact, and we are not talking about scientific impact. So we're not talking about research papers or number of papers or numbers of citations to papers. That's absolutely not what we mean by what we're talking about in terms of impact today. But in the literature, often this does get bundled in. But this division is sort of quite an artifact of how impact has been thought of in the UK context as well. So to be clear, it's wider benefits of research for society and not publication or citations to publications. So why impact? Well, there are lots of different narratives that are given, and we can think about for why suddenly this interest 10 plus years ago in thinking about this idea of assessing research impact. Now, underpinning it in the policy terms is the idea of the public accountability of science to society, and by science is meant, you know, to include universities and everything that goes on within it. So if universities are supported by public funds, or research councils are funding research which is supported by public funds, then there's the argument that the public itself should be seeing benefits of this investment. And also in recent years too, when the public purse has been tightening, and in times of austerity, there's been debates about, well, we need to fund the most impactful research that can have benefits to the economy and society more broadly. Now, I'm sort of outlining what the arguments are. I'm not saying what side I am on of these arguments, so please don't project things on me. We can pick things up in discussion later. There is also the notion of perhaps ivory towers, and were universities off conducting research that were sort of in conversations, in publications that the public couldn't access, and sort of debating angels on pinheads, and not with any relevance. The question, is academia too divorced from reality, and is impact thereby a tool to make sure that research is relevant? I'll also point out that philosophy is my first degree, so I'm not averse to counting angels on pinheads. Okay, so, and also there's been a growth in interest in actually measuring research outcomes. Research funders, particularly on the medical and health side, have been into measuring research outcomes for quite a long time, and they had naturally drifted from counting publications to trying to gauge wider benefits. And also various technologies were helping to make measuring research outcomes actually something that was more feasible and realistic. So, pathways to impact. So in the UK, we've got a dual funding system for university funding. So on the one hand, and I'll talk about the block grant next, there's a block grant that is given to universities, and that partly funds research that happens within universities. And the other way is for us to go out and apply for research grants. And the UK research councils are publicly funded. So on a competitive basis, as academics, we can apply for research grants from those research councils. So for the year 2018 to 19, the research councils, there are 7 of them, I think, in the UK, and they invested 1.9 billion in competitive research grants. So that's a lot of money being invested. And the Economic and Social Research Council for that period spent around 250 million pounds on research and innovation. So basically that means competitive research grants. So the Economic and Social Research Council define impact as the demonstrable contribution excellent research makes to society and the economy. And for every grant application that's made, there needs to be, as part of that application, something that's called a pathways to impact statement. So this is ex ante, so that means sort of before the fact. You need to say what you believe the impacts of the research you're proposing will be. And not only that, but what's the implementation plan? What actions are you going to take to try and guarantee that impact? And the ESRC and other research councils tend to get more alpha rated, which means excellent should be funded applications, then they can actually fund. And it might just be that it's a weak impact section is the one thing that stands between a grant getting up and not. So it's something that we sort of all need to take quite seriously. So that's pathways to impact. And on the other hand, I also included here, so this is from the research councils. So on the left-hand side with the orange, it's academic impacts, which are not really what we're talking about in terms of impact. It's sort of the right-hand side, the green side. So we've got things like improving health and well-being, wealth creation, economic prosperity and regeneration, enhancing research capacity, knowledge and skills of public, private and third sector organisations. There's an organisational change one. And so we've got, for example, improving social welfare, social cohesion and or national security. We've got enhancing cultural enrichment and quality of life, environmental sustainability, but there's also evidence-based policy, making and influencing public policies, and also increasing public engagement with research and related societal issues. So those are some examples which I think on the one hand can read as quite instrumental, but when you look at these, they're also very all-encompassing as well. But that's just a link there. And I've provided some links at the end as well. So that will take you to the ESRC Pathways to Impact guidance and resources as well. Now that's to give you a flavour of sort of the what the ESRC is talking about. So there's the ref. I'm assuming, unless you've been living under the rock for the last little while, everybody knows about the ref. But if not, it's the Research Excellence Framework. And what this is an audit of excellence of research in UK universities. And this happens sort of roughly 6, 7, 8-ish years. And we've just come to the end of one ref cycle. We're just beginning a new one, and it'll be roughly about a year until we get the results of that. So, for example, as a result of the last ref exercise in 2014, every year, 1.9 billion is given as an outcome of this exercise to UK universities, and it's estimated that about 300 million of that is derived from assessing impact in different universities. So in terms of this broader exercise, then there are different units of assessment which kind of more or less map onto departments, and sort of normally sociology, for example, would be compared with other sociology departments across the country, but there are other configurations, and sometimes universities sort of group departments together into larger groupings. So each unit of assessment in a university will be given a ranking, and then all of the different units for the university are totaled up, and then some kind of behind doors magic happens, and sort of the final results are given. But then the money that goes to universities is determined by a funding formula, and it's sort of quite a significant and important chunk of money for universities. And while on the one hand, there's competitive research grants from the research councils, this money that comes from the REF is supposed to sort of underpin research at universities, and perhaps also support new or sort of more basic research that might not necessarily get external funding. So in this context, impact's defined as an effect on change or benefit to the economy, society, culture, public policy or services, health, the environmental quality of life beyond academia. So again, that's a very, very broad definition, and there are various sub-definitions, and basically you can fit anything within that. Now, in the REF in 2014, 65% of the overall sort of total in terms of coming up with grades and allocations was better at that so in 2014, different career academic.
Sorry to interrupt you, Claire. Is it just me or everyone is not hearing?
20%. Now, in the REF, that's just gone and is being assessed at the moment. Quality was 60, environment 15, and impact went up to 25%. And there are groups lobbying for impact going up to 40% of the next round, from nothing to a quarter in very short time as well. So in terms of the last REF, this was judged ex post, so it's on the basis of impact that has already happened and in the form of impact case studies. And so, for example, in the last REF, sort of the work that covered by the people here today would have gone into unit of assessment 20, which is social work and social policy. And there were two wonderful impact case studies. One was looking at co-production with community organisations to humanise and improve confidence and well-being of migrant families with no recourse to public funds. And that's research that's been sort of led by Tracy Reynolds. And a second impact case study, again, was looking at co-production, but with a group in Deptford called Second Wave Youth Arts, and looking at building trust and leadership and improved community and police engagement. So that's just giving you a little sort of Greenwich flavour of kind of what that looks like here. Okay, so in terms of, I know I focused on just giving brief definitions, etc., for the Research Council and for REF. But what's important is that not exclusively all, but many funders of research are expecting some kind of account of impact in funding applications now. And the sort of environment in terms of ref does filter down into university management, and the need for us all to develop this for our careers.
Claire, can you stop just a moment, because I think the line is going. Claire, I don't know if you can hear me. Sorry. Oh, pause. Oh,
Understand it and build impact and
Hi, I just put in the chat. Maybe we should all turn our cameras off.
yes, I tried to intervene, but I was muted and it didn't let me come in. Sorry, Claire, I think we missed a bit of what you were saying before. The communication just went and then it came back, and now it just went again. You sound really metallic and it's undistinguishable.
Oh, really sorry.
No, it's okay. It's not. I was wondering if it was just me, but then I noticed that in the chat also other people weren't hearing you. So maybe could you just, no, that's okay. Now I think you're back. So do you mind repeating just the last bit that you were saying?
Yeah, of course not. Where did I? I'm so sorry, I didn't notice. Where did I get to?
I don't know. I think it's just the last bit. Okay, yeah, we didn't hear the.
It was those ones at top impact.
Okay. Okay, so right. So in terms of top impact tips, so these are short and sweet and something to discuss further. And as I said earlier, we could do a whole webinar on every single one of these points. Is that in terms of impact, we need to be thinking more creatively than conducting some research and then having a dissemination event at the end. Impact needs to be something far more creative than that. And it's really important to have a very coherent impact plan. So not just saying what impact that you hope research will have, but also to be able to say how you're going to go about doing that. Who will you be engaging with? How do you embed impact within the whole research project? A point that comes up again and again is it's so important when talking about impact to communicate simply and without using jargon, because often there will be lay people who are not from your academic background who might be evaluating at in terms of a group peer reviewing grants or looking at an impact case study, for example. So that clear and simple communication is very important. But the biggest tip is co-production, and more co-production. So there are empirical findings that research co-produced with research users and beneficiaries is more likely to have meaningful impact. So it's important for there to be engagement throughout the research process, from coming up with that initial research idea, the framing of research ideas, ensuring common interests are addressed, and also being able to prime research users and communities for findings and recommendations so that they can promote those in their networks and then ready to uptake where that's relevant. And this is a really interesting thing and something that really came out in the work I helped with at Greenwich for ref and impact case studies, and it's authenticity. Really connecting and co-producing research with different communities will, done properly, end up with a more authentic and meaningful research product. As we don't want to be people who are engaging in relationships just to have a good impact case study. So, there's something about the long-term building and fostering of relationships and impact actually being an authentic process. So I'm from an education department, and most of what we do is about trying to make a difference. And that's the same across broadly most of the social sciences, that I think the criticism of what was previously the REF, the research assessment exercise, is that it ignored any research that sort of connected with practitioners or, changed something in the world. So impact is kind of seen as an antidote to that. So I'm going to round off there, but I've got some resources and a bit of further reading if people are interested. So this link here will take you to the ESRC's Impact Toolkit. And so everything in ESRC terms is explained, and there's some really helpful guidance. There's a link here. There's a really good REF impact case study database, and it's searchable, and you can sort of break down by discipline or use keywords and find case studies that are linked to any, your area of research. But one thing to bear in mind is that it contains all impact case studies, and you don't know how they were rated, and some would be brilliant 4-star and some weren't so good, so you kind of need to be aware. But I think you should through reading be able to make a judgment yourself about how sound things are. And just quickly, there's just a bit more reading of some of my publications. One of those, a recent one with colleagues at Harvard and at the University of Barcelona, is looking at this is based on interviews, etc. But what are effective strategies to actually gain social impact of social sciences and humanities research? So there might be some tips there of ideas to think about. What would an effective strategy be for gaining impact? There's another paper that's looking at the ethics of what I call impactology, which isn't a word, I'm warning you. And then another piece that where I'm talking there, it's sort of discussion for another time, but looking more at the sociological aspects and the politics of research impact. And just very finally, there's a review of literature of the social and political impact of social sciences and humanities research. So that's me done. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. That was really interesting, and really kind of covered all the bases that we need to kind of understand and know about before we launch into trying to achieve impact with our research. I think feel free to ask questions, by the way, all of you. I'm going to start with, well, I've got a question, but I'm going to start with Richard's question, because he put it in the chat ages ago. Although I'm not sure I understand it, Richard, but how are academic impacts ranked or valorized against each other? For example, well-being versus global. I'm not really sure I understand what you mean.
No, don't worry. It was really clear. It was referencing the slide that you put up with the where you had the academic impact on the one side, and then and I just curious how these are rated and ranked, and so I mean, an example, a concrete example, I think it was from possibly the previous, may even be the RAE, might have been 2 refs back, but was a colleague of mine who works in the department with a whole load of UN rapporteurs, and they just really tanked in terms of impact because they were, I don't know, they were busy doing stuff on the ground, but they weren't doing it in such a way that they could provide measurable impact for it. So I'm just curious how those are all kind of ranked against each other, the well-being one, the global impact, etc.
I think it's every funder or whoever will have, their, a lot of work obviously has to go with comparing apples and oranges. And one of my publications is looking at impact and quality in economics, and There was one high-profile go-to unit for Aboriginal economics that had a massive impact on policy, but then ranked in quality terms, they tanked. But then sort of just down the corridor where the other, more theoretical economists who got the highest quality ratings but got nothing for impact. And I think the idea of the ref is to be able to have that quality and sort of that sort of more real world impact included. But in terms of how is this done, if you look up the ref guidance, and there's also panel, and he said panic, there's a Freudian slip, panel specific guidance. There are pages and pages and pages and pages of instructions. There's someone called Gemma Derrick, who was one of my sort of ESLC Future Fellowship people. She came and worked with me for 2-3 years. She looked at panels in the first ref exercise, and she's got a book called The Evaluator's Eye, and it's kind of lifting the bonnet on what's happening behind the scenes, and the extent to which were reviewers actually falling back on the quality rather than the broader impact. But I think certainly in terms of ref and grant applications, a lot of effort goes in by the funders to try and make sure that it's kind of like our marking rubrics, that we're sort of, evaluators are doing what they should be doing. Whether sociologically, whether, what actually goes on in those rooms is a different thing. But I think that there's a lot of work to try and make sure the process is fair and transparent. But it's a really good point, because it is putting an assessment on sort of very, very, quite diverse areas. So it's an important point to consider, but a lot of work by funders goes into trying to address that.
Thank you, Claire. I've got another question from Andrew. What do you think are the key differences between humanities impact and the social sciences? And he's got a second question, which I think is it separate or is it comment? But yeah, I think you can probably just go ahead and address that one. What do you think the key differences are between humanities impact and social science?
I'm not quite sure how to answer that one really, because I mean there's such a blurring, and where do humanities and social sciences end and begin? And I think one thing that was interesting when I've been involved in impact pilots that have looked across the natural sciences, social sciences, and arts, humanities, is that potentially every area can tick every different kind of impact box. So in terms of impacts, it seems like almost anywhere could potentially have any type of impact. I mean, obviously you'd expect economic impacts to be more tied to business and economic researchers, but I don't think it's sort of very clearly straightforward.
Okay, thanks very much for that. But just very, very struck that it's much more difficult for humanities academics to think in impact terms, because we're so used to dealing with textual materials. And we haven't had any help, to be quite honest, on impact in panel D. And I would have been really helpful to help but think through the possibilities, not of course come up with answers, but to think through the possibilities from our research leads. So I think that would have been very, very helpful. I've got another question as well.
Can I just come back on that?
Yeah.
Because actually in Australia, I did loads of workshops sort of going around the country.
Fantastic.
Because my background is philosophy, and sort of my doctorate, etc., social and political thought. So I've always got this sort of humanities
Well, that's brilliant. So can we look forward to
being put together? And I would say that humanities were always my most challenging audiences, because also I'm not like an apologist. It's the system is here. How can we use it to our benefit? And I found that we had to throw the agenda for the morning out the window, because everybody wants to go back to basics and debate really important, clear issues, which I think is important to then be able to move forward. But it's, I think it is, with support, it can be done quite easily. But I think also there is an area of basic research, which I personally have always argued that basic research and also young and emerging research groups shouldn't have to do the impact element if they don't want to, but to be able to properly justify that. But that's been a bit of a no-go and has always been included. But I think, for example, in terms of the ref, we need to pick like a cross-section of impact over whatever the whole unit is. So it's not like everybody has to always, has to report impact from every area of their research. But I think also, real support is needed in the humanities sense as well.
Oh, that's really, really helpful. I'm really looking forward to your coming to speak to us, actually, and helping to think this through, because we haven't had that before. A lot more of my writing is actually sort of the philosophy and the politics and the social theory of impact. So I never really get much of a chance to That would be really wonderful. And then thinking through what impact might actually be, both in practical terms and indeed in theoretical terms, which is certainly of enormous interest to us. No, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you. And I think the key to it, again, is this word authenticity, being able to sort of authentically and not be playing games with, showing that genuine impact that is out there.
Thank you, Claire. I've got a question from Tracy. What is the difference, if any, between academic impact and academic beneficiaries?
So the difference between impact and beneficiaries.
Yeah, Claire, on the on the JES forms, the UKI JES forms, it doesn't actually, there's different sections. It doesn't have academic impact. It asks for academic beneficiaries, and I get really confused. And I was thinking, are they the same? Are they different? Or is academic impact a part of academic beneficiaries? It's really confusing for me. I mean, I really liked, but I liked your presentation overall, and I think something the university should be doing anyway to everybody actually as a researcher. And I like that the chart that you show, the flow chart, but it's quite confusing to me.
Okay, because I'd have to see the context, but I would have thought impact is the actual impact, and the beneficiaries are the people who we hope are benefiting from the impact. So, for example, for there's this wonderful impact case study about looking at migrant families with no recourse to public funds. And so this is Tracy's impact case study. So in that case, the beneficiaries would be migrant families and their communities. And the impact itself would be changes in practice of community organisations, or there is a wonderful example of influencing policy or changes in policy. So those would be the impact, but the beneficiaries would be the communities or the people who are affected.
So it could just be the way that, because I'm looking at, as I'm filling out, the JES form, and thank you for that. And I was just thinking, I'm sure they're using academic, they're conflating academic, because I understood it how you've just said it, but I was thinking maybe they're conflating academic beneficiaries and academic impact. So it just threw me for a bit. I was like, oh, I'm really confused now what the difference is.
Yeah.
But thank you.
I agree, it's very confusing because Claire just spoke about the difference between academic impact and societal impact. So clearly that question is indeed very confusing. Yeah, I wanted to ask about it as well, actually. Is Panagiotis the next question?
Yes, I think so.
Sorry, hi, thank you, Claire. That's very insightful. I have a question that I've always been troubled with, and I found it difficult to navigate my way through a project when considering impact, especially when applying for funding. So to my mind, I mean, and maybe I'm just poorly thinking about this, but to have impact, really what you initially need to have is high quality research. Because if you don't have good outputs, if you don't have good outcomes from the research, not outputs, and if the research is not, of high quality, then the impact is not good anyways. I mean, it depends on how you present it, I guess. But I guess I wanted to ask whether you had any particular tips or ideas of how do we balance that? Because especially with funders, what I find difficult is to try and give weight, because there's always word count and all that, to put weight on either sort of how I'm ensuring that high quality of research versus focusing on impact.
Yeah, it's a really interesting question. And with the Aboriginal economics example I was given earlier, there was a whole argument in Australia about high impact research means low quality research. And that's not true. You'll see the ESRC definition says impact is underpinned by, excellent research with impact. And the ref itself, when you do an impact case study, you need to show what the underpinning research was and demonstrate that's above a certain quality threshold. But what's really interesting, though, is that these are sort of very linear ways of looking at impact, that we write a research paper and then we send it out into the world or engage, and then something happens because of the wonderful quality research, and then impact occurs. When I first got into this in Australia, and we were looking at what are exemplars of really brilliant impact that have happened, in every single case in research groups or projects, the impact happened first and then the publications happened afterwards. And so, especially if we're trying to foster very long-term relationships with groups and not just going in for an impact hit and then sort of abandoning them, there's, it's sort of quite amorphous when trying to sort of work out, is it a linear process? Quite often it isn't. But it's really interesting. People have conducted empirical studies on, is quality a predictor of impact? And therefore, can we get rid of the impact element in the ref, for example, because quality surely is an indicator of impact. But when you sort of do bibliometric studies that are looking at publications and impacts, it's all a bit of a mess. But I think there is evidence that higher quality research does lead to better impacts, but there's much more evidence that high quality co-production and relationships with beneficiaries and well-managed projects lead to better impact. What we don't want is impact that's underpinned by bad research, such as, and the example that always comes up is the poor research on MMR and autism, for example, and the poor effect that had. Or in Australia, an example that was used a lot is a guy called Windshuttle, who's basically a Holocaust denier, an academic, and his views are based on not rigorous research. So that's always in the back of the mind of people, to have some kind of quality threshold, so we don't have people who have a big public impact, but actually it's harmful stuff that they're doing. So it's a very complex question, but I'm sure every funder will say they want high quality and high impact at the same time, please. Thank you. And I'm sure you do both anyway.
Yeah, thanks, Claire. I did have some follow-up, but I'm going to stop because there are other questions in the chat. Thank you.
So yeah, we've got a question from Eleanor. What is the link between impact and knowledge exchange? These are also terms that get conflated.
Yeah, I mean, maybe someone can tell me that one as well. It's really interesting because it's quite a blurred line. So I think often we're thinking about who are the communities that we're engaging with. And I think sometimes universities look at, for example, where funding has come from. So if it's a direct research contract from an external organisation, that gets ticked as knowledge exchange. But if you're working with the same people, but it's funded by a research grant from a research council, that falls into the other bracket. So I think it's sort of very, very blurred lines. But also I've got to learn a lot more about KEF. That's one I've not covered before, but is part of my portfolio soon. So, but I mean, I don't know if anybody else has an answer. I think it's sort of quite a blurred one.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I think especially now that Greenwich has made knowledge exchange a core part of its strategy going forward, I think we're all going to have to, I think about it much more actively perhaps than we did before.
And it might be that knowledge exchange might be more sort of locally based interactions as well, rather than sort of massive national research grants. So something perhaps, ongoing, but smaller in some respects as well.
Can I just add a thought to that? Because with teaching partnerships, I think it depends on the disciplines as well sometimes, because when it's practice orientated or policy orientated, particularly in the field, with knowledge exchange, there will be the interest of how could you co-produce, which is similar to impact, but it's a case of how do you transfer skills that you have as a researcher to somebody who's in practice, for example, so they can be a practice researcher, and how can they take your skills and become a practice lecturer or a professor, and sort of that whole idea of how do you enable progression across the board. I think that's how it's received by the Department for Education in any ways when it comes to teaching partnerships in social work, for instance. And I think it's an ad hoc understanding of what knowledge exchange might be. Just a thought from my experience on that.
Yeah, I guess also we can look at what doesn't the ref include and say that's knowledge exchange as well. But there is some artificiality in the boundaries as well. But that's a really good point in terms of that sort of knowledge exchange and training.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you so much for these really fruitful discussions. We've got to now draw this part of the webinar to a close. And please join me in thanking Claire for taking the time and sharing with us her ideas and experience. It's been illuminating, and we hope that this will bring forth more collaborations across our faculties as well.
Thank you. And can I apologise for the tech issues and not realising I was talking into the ether, but also to sort of congratulate you on this initiative and to wish you every single luck. And I'm very happy to play any part that I can if you want me to. So.
Thank you. We will definitely hit you up, Claire. Thank you. So
okay,
much.
Good luck, everyone. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thanks.
Thanks, Claire.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
So for those of you who are still with us, don't leave just yet. We still got half an hour to go.
Not finished yet.
No, what we're going to do is take a very short break, and then we will be sort of split into two groups, smaller groups, so that we all have a chance to speak and participate. And myself and Elena will each be in one group, and we'll go through some of the questions that we shared with you before, just to get a sense of where we're going with this. We want for people to throw down their ideas about what should be the priorities going forward in terms of collaborating around the question of impact, and maybe thinking about building some working groups on specific issues that are of salience to, I guess, most people. So that's what we're going to do.
So there will be now a comfort break of a few minutes while we organize the breakout groups, and then we will be back, discuss for 15, maximum 20 minutes, and then come back and just draw the conclusion, share our thoughts, and then leave the meeting at 3:30.
Very good at time management. Mary, is there anyone?
Mary posts a question just before.
Yes. Yeah.
Broke up.
Yeah. I just wondered, different places I've worked, they've talked about portfolios of collections of people who've been working together on research, and I haven't really seen or heard that being talked about at all at Greenwich. And I just wondered if that was something that people did, if they were co-producing and that they were able to sort of submit a portfolio of different ref items. Do you know what I mean? I think it lends itself more to the creative sort of subjects, practice subjects.
Harry, I think you're talking about.
Sorry, I just remembered that I forgot to record our session.
I also forgot as well. So
Great.
But I've taken notes though, so it's okay.
Me too.
Okay,
Fantastic. We were having a really interesting discussion, actually. I don't know who wants to start sharing. You want to go, Julia, or
no, you go first because you're already on the mic.
Okay, right. Okay. So, well, we were just discussing, I'm gonna just go through my notes that are a bit scattered, but we were just discussing the fact that impact is so difficult to, to even gauge in the right way, because it's kind of almost, especially the academic impact, because it's almost much easier when you have, say, a government funding that wants you to work with organization to achieve a certain type of impact, for instance, in social work, as the example that was brought up, to justify impact, because that's much more straightforward. But then which led us to say how much time then these type processes to establish academic impact are required, how much time is required, because of course there is this aspect of the fact that, as Andrew was saying, impact is not portable in a way, because it's the institution that is being attributed impact, but is actually based on personal relationship that people have with civil society organizations, and how then this relationship needs cultivating over time, and the amount of time that requires on top of the jobs that we already have. So it is time consuming, that also leads us to reflect on the type of resources that we have or that we lack, because of course in maybe more in universities that have more of a research culture, that have perhaps also the resources and the research assistants that help you with this calculating impacts, banging out surveys, quantitative kind of findings that are quickly elaborated, because relying on a research assistant, while maybe in our post-92 institutions is more difficult to have that research culture that allows you to find the time and resources to achieve the type of impact that, however, we need. So here is the contradiction again, to establish ourselves. So it's kind of a vicious circle a little bit. I think there were other discussions about film and the impact that for some of our people in our group, film is a way to creating impact, but then they were told that film is not part of impact. So, I mean, again, misunderstandings around what counts as impact and what doesn't. And I think that's it. Let me know if I forgot anything.
Well, that sounds great. That sounds like you've had a lot of interesting discussions. I think we sort of skipped the part about institutional barriers because we wanted to get to ideas about potential working groups. But basically, the discussion was kicked off by Tracy, who was talking about how her kind of work with migrant families and women was all about making a positive change in women's lives, but it wasn't necessarily framed in the narrative not context, but in the narrative and words of the impact agenda. So, it took a while for her to get to learn those words. And even now, she doesn't feel 100% confident that she understands what a good impact case study looks like, despite having worked on them. So one of the working groups could be about, how to write a good impact case study, borrowing from, Claire's and others' expertise and knowledge, and working together with the Impact Community of Practice kind of project, and trying to build those links very early on. Because the other thing, of course, is that, like Richard was pointing out, we didn't make a long-term plan for the ref. We just kind of woke up 2 years before or something at Greenwich, and we're like, oh, ref, great, whatever. And everybody was like kind of falling from the chair, and just, yeah. So obviously having that kind of long-term 5 years plan, like the Soviets, might be, a good thing. And starting now, so obviously, we got commended, Elena, for taking the initiative of starting this at this point, obviously really close to the end of the REF 2021. And then Karen brought up the fact that while she's not, she hasn't done a lot of active research as a Greenwich staff, academic staff, she wants to kind of learn more about co-production, because co-production is a core part of what good impact looks like in terms of collaborations and knowledge production and whatnot. So perhaps it was mounted that we could have a co-production working group whereby we think about the ethics, expectations, presentations, establishing relations with research co-producers and knowledge co-producers and so on. And
that'd be awesome. So were you suggesting, so one working group would be about co-production? What was the other one?
It was about sort of impact case studies and sort of good impact case studies, and how to make good impact case studies, particularly, I guess, in the humanities and social sciences. So with a focus on FLAS portfolio rather than a general, obviously, if you look at an impact case study from, so having maybe even having external people come in and delivering sessions about it, trying to build that in, and obviously relying on the resources that we already have, like Claire and Jean Milan.
I was thinking that calling external experts, because I know somebody who is doing, for instance, a master on co-production in Glasgow, and there are these this type of really specialized type courses that are emerging everywhere. So having somebody who actually comes and tells, I know that we do co-production. I use co-production in my research practice, but then also hear about co-production from a different perspective, which is the more like service co-production type ideas, would be also interesting, because it helps us thinking how to apply it to research.
Yeah, because Tracy was saying that, she was like doing co-production for years before it became popular and mainstream, right? And it's about, kind of making what you're already doing in your practice as fit into the model of impacts that is dominant, and therefore being recognized for it as well. Because we had a discussion about, how there's been a paradigm shift in, from kind of the ivory tower academia, where people would sort of like write papers and then they would like maybe go into the ether, until slowly they would percolate into the mainstream and common language. And we use Crenshaw's intersectionality as an example. And then, but how maybe, for a more positive spin, things can change because the paradigm shift means that academics are now forced to think about, impact and more democratic participation at the start of their project, rather than putting stuff out there and then hoping that it might eventually, for the grace of God, get picked up. So that was the kind of point of discussion that we had as well.
That sounds wonderful. So is it 2 working groups then? Okay. So far, that's brilliant. So I think it was really helpful today. So thank you so much for attending. And how should we leave this? Should we just maybe now think about how we go, to organize these working groups, but also see how we can organize the next event as part of the Applied Sociology Research Center. So everything will be advertised on there, but you will also receive emails about the groups and how we're going to go about running them.
I think also just linking into what's, because like they were talking about a community of practice and replicating, we're linking into that. And I know that ILD had a really good public lecture, I think it was last week or the week before, and it was somebody from UCL talking about participatory methods. Projects were to do with autism. But they've got some great, I mean, their funding and resources, as you can imagine, at UCL, it's just amazing. And I was just having a look at the sort of, so you're talking about having a co-production expert. This person who did the talk would be a co-production expert. And they've got amazing toolkits and resources and things, which they've published as part of NIHR, and they've got a lot of funding from them. So, yeah.
I wonder if we should have a team, a repository with all the resources that have been shared, like today, with all those websites, what you just mentioned, Tracy. So that just to create some information hub as well that we can use also easily when we have to inform our own impact when we write a research proposal. So we have doubts about writing it up.
That's a great idea, Eleanor. Yeah, we should do that. So would everybody that's currently in the room be happy to be included in a Teams page for sharing resources? Yeah, obviously I know that we've got more and more Teams pages now, so, groups and whatnot, but I guess you know, you don't have to visit it every day. It's just cool. Okay, great, wonderful. So we'll set one up. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. So anything else that anyone would like to say? No.
Thank you both for organising.
Yeah, I was going to say thank you.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you.
Oh, yeah, thanks.
Thank you all. Yeah, and I would like to remind you that we have a research center launch on the 8th of July. If you're interested in attending, we will have a panel with organizations that we've been working with. We will have a panel with a multidisciplinary cross-faculty panel with people who are already collaborating with the research center. We will have a keynote that talks about quite, you know, creative participatory research, so about co-production. So yeah, stay tuned because you will receive from Karen the ad on the launch.
Amazing.
Brilliant.
Okay.
So thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Nice to see you.